Well, it's good to be back with you. I really appreciate Alvy for stepping in on such short notice. I blindsided him twice, not just once, but twice. So I appreciate that and all the good comments that I've received. His good class, and I know that was good for all of you as well. We've been studying the book of Genesis now for quite a few weeks, and in particular we've talked about 4 of the Bible periods that we learned about. So let's talk about that just briefly. What's the first Bible period that we learn about in Genesis? Okay, before the flood, and that would include what? Creation, yeah. Okay. All right, and then obviously the period after creation, the major period, is the flood, right? And after the flood, we have the Tower of Babel, and what occurred at that point in time?
Everybody's language got changed.
Okay, and that caused what?
They had to get away from each other.
Okay, the scattering of the people. All right? And so following that, we have this extended period of history in the book of Genesis concerning what section or what group of people, mainly?
Well, the
patriarchs.
Abram and Abraham.
Okay, patriarchs. All right, so as we continue to study about the patriarchs today, who in particular are we talking about this morning?
The fathers of the people.
Okay, the fathers of the people, and what father in particular?
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph.
All right, what father in particular today?
Jacob. Jacob's return.
All right, very good. All right, so at the very end of our study in chapter 31, we find that Jacob is on his way back toward Canaan after staying with Laban for how many years? 20, yeah. And I thought about, and he mentions this, Brother Walter and Sister Walter mentioned this in our information here. Rebecca, when she sent Jacob away to stay with Laban, she said, go and stay a few days. And so I thought that was interesting. You know, she told him, go and stay a few days while the anger of your brother abates. But that wasn't exactly how it worked out for him. But when he came home, after he had crossed over the Jordan with only a staff, he came back home with 2 companies of peoples and animals and servants and all of that. And so we'll get into that a little bit this morning. And so over the course of the past 2 class periods, you've been talking about how Jacob obtained all of this. And how did he obtain all of it?
The Lord had blessed him.
Okay, the Lord had blessed him, that's right. And so he had obtained how many wives? 2. How many handmaids that became his wives? 2. All right, how many children? Up to this point in time. 12 counting Dinah, right? But in connection with his discussion with Esau, as we'll see today, he only mentions 11. So we'll talk about that when we get to that point. I think you know well why that was the case. But as we see him continue to prosper, and y'all stated about how all that happened with the peeling of the poplar and all the other rods that he put before the watering troughs there, and how that when the animals mated, they brought forth the speckled and the ring-streaked and all of that. And all those became his animals. And by the way, what beautiful animals those would have been. Of course, normally sheep and goats would have been either white or black, but all of those varied colors would have been much more beautiful animals and much more hardy animals by the blessing of the Lord. as we have seen. And so when Jacob and his family left over there in Aram and Laban's house, they just kind of snuck away, didn't they?
Yeah.
And really the whole story is a convoluted, jumbled up mess, if you will, from the standpoint that it was full of deceit from the very beginning. And so this kind of follows along the way that Jacob had begun his life, didn't it? I mean, he was known as the supplanter. You know, he took basically those things that belonged to his brother as far as the blessing of the firstborn and the father's blessing and all those other things that he got. And when he got over there to Laban really turned around, did much the same thing to him in giving him Leah instead of Rachel as he wanted. And then he worked an additional 7 years for Rachel, and then worked how many years for the animals? 6. Yeah, 7 and 7. He stayed 20 years. So 7 for Rachel.
Oh, yeah.
7 for Leah, 7 for Rachel, and that would have left 6 for the animals. Okay, so then they came out, and as you studied, you know, Rachel created an issue there with stealing the teraphim, and some of these, I don't know what y'all talked about in regard to the teraphim, but I looked at those as maybe idols. Others considered those as maybe some kind of talisman, some kind of lucky charm or something like that. But whatever it wasn't based in, you know, the faith of God and that type of thing. So for some reason or another, she wanted something of her father's, and so she took those. And so as they began to travel, you know, we know about the meeting, the very, I don't know, high temperature, I guess you could say, for lack of better phrasing, meeting with Laban and Jacob, and then they end that with a covenant, and they leave, they depart one another. Laban gets up that morning and kisses his family and goes back to his place, and Jacob and his family head on toward Canaan. Well, as they get closer to Canaan, then we come to the story that we're going to learn about today. And I had such a wonderful PowerPoint for us, but I saved it in a format that's not compatible to what I have today, so we won't get to see that. But nonetheless, as we look at our scripture, Genesis chapter 32, and we begin studying here from this material that has been provided for us, we find that Jacob is preparing to meet his brother Esau. Now, last we heard of Jacob and Esau, Esau wanted to do what? He wanted to kill his brother for doing what?
For taking his birthright.
Yeah, not only taking his birthright, but taking the father's blessing that came along with that and those other things that he would have received. And he did that, of course, as we've studied before, by deception. And so as we begin then in verse 1 of chapter 32 of Genesis, as Jacob is going on his way before he meets Esau, he sees angels of God. And he meets these people or these angels in a place that he later calls Mahanel, which means 2 camps. And so in this particular place, when he is there meeting or seeing the angel of God, he's saying this has got to be God's place. God is in this place. And as we have studied through the book of Genesis thus far, every time, and I'm not saying necessarily that this is a failing of the patriarchs, but every time something important like this occurs, God speaks to one of the patriarchs or God does something for one of the patriarchs, they always say, God is in this place. I don't know that they have understood yet that God is everywhere. But they do know that God especially is in this place. So that's what Jacob had to say when he saw those angels. He said, this is God's camp, or God's place, or this is where the companies come together, God's angels and my family. And so whatever we can garner from that, let's understand that Jacob does recognize the presence of God, and has always done that. There's one thing that we learn about Jacob is that he seems like from the beginning has been taught by his father Isaac, his mother Rebekah, that God is the God of gods. There's no other beside him. And while Jacob may have took off on his own tangent from now and again, he always recognized and came back to the fact that God was the one that sustained him. God was the one that took care of him. And that's why we have this great history of Jacob and his family, and also those that preceded him of the patriarchs. And so Jacob knows that they're coming back to the country of Seir. And Seir is also known as what? Edom. There was a mountain in that region that was called Mount Seir, and Edom was the land where the sons of Edom lived, and the sons of Edom were whose descendants? Esau's descendants, right. Esau's descendants. And so he knows he's coming back toward that country, and so he wants to send emissaries or messengers over to him. Why would Jacob be so concerned about that and sending messengers and providing gifts and all of those other things?
To appease Esau.
Okay, why would he need to do that?
Well, he's thinking he still had a grudge and he was going to kill him.
Okay, all right, so he's very concerned. But last he saw Esau's last words that he knew from his mother Rebekah were that Esau's going to kill you. You've got to leave. And so he's very concerned, as would be anyone. And so he says, now, I want you to go, he says to these messengers, I want you to go and tell my brother Esau that I have lived with Laban all this time. And I now have wives, and I have children, and I have flocks, and I have men servants, and I have maid servants, and I am coming to find favor in your sight. And so the messengers go, and they come again, and so Jacob wants to know what's happening, what's going on, what was the response, and so what did they say? What did the messengers tell him?
We came to meet your brother Esau. He's coming to meet you, and he has 400 men.
Okay, he's coming to meet you with 400 men. That must have been very chilling. They didn't say yea or nay, or at least it's not recorded yea or nay of what his attitude was about that. But so he's now coming with these 400 men, and so Jacob's thinking the worst, of course. And so he says, I've got to prepare myself. And so what does he do?
He works his company into two bands.
Okay, all right, so this tells us a couple of things. First of all, it tells us that Jacob is concerned that he's going to lose everything because he's afraid Esau's going to come and just totally wipe out his family. It also tells us that he's thinking ahead that perhaps if Esau comes and engages this first company, then the second company can get away. But it tells us the greater picture, I think, that we find here is that he has so many flocks and servants and family members that he's able to split them into two. God has blessed him to that extent. And so we would say, yeah, but he really only has like 17 or 18 in his family. That may be true, but think about all of the flocks and think about all of the servants that it would take to take care of those. We've talked about those types of things before in connection with Abraham and also Isaac and how they were blessed. Jacob here, starting with nothing, literally, has come back a very prosperous man. He's able to make preparation to separate himself from Esau and to protect his family in that regard. So he says if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then perhaps the company which is left shall escape. And then he does something very important, essential, more important than making plans to prepare or to keep part of his people separated from Esau's attackers. If that happens, what does he do next?
He prays and that God would deliver him.
He does. He does. Beginning in verse 9 of Genesis 32, let's read. Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who did say to me, return to your country and your relatives, and I will prosper you. Now, Jacob here is reminding God what he told that he would do for Jacob. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with Jacob saying, Lord, this is what you promised me. Now I am appealing to you based upon what you have said. I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and all the faithfulness which thou hast shown to thy servant, for with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me, the mothers with the children. For thou didst say, I will surely prosper you, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Again, he's reminding him of that promise. So he spent the night there, then he selected from what he had with him a present for his brother Esau. So we have to give Jacob a great deal of credit. He's doing what he can do, to prepare himself for what he thinks is going to be calamity. But the most important thing is that he recognizes his reliance upon God, that God has made some promises to him. He has seen those promises, somewhat fulfilled in the lives of his father and grandfather. He knows how God has blessed them. He's seen that. He's recognized that. But now he's appealing to God on his own behalf that God come through and fulfill the promises that he made to Jacob. And certainly he did so. So Jacob stays there in Peniel or Penuel, which is an alternate spelling of Peniel. He stays in that general area, even though he has not, in our text, has not named that yet. He stays in that general area. And he separates then from what he had, a present for his brother. Now let's look at this. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. That's a lot. That is just that portion, just that small portion, if you will, of his flock. Probably not even a tenth. May have been as much as a tenth, but probably not even a tenth. He separates those, and then he's providing servants to go with those to appease Esau. But that right there would make that's the starting of a great herd. In a year's time, that herd could easily triple. Easily triple. Goats and sheep generally have two different offsprings, sets of offspring a year. It's not uncommon for them to have multiples. We've had as many From our goats, we've had as many as 5 from one nanny. You know, they don't always survive when they're that many, but 3 is very common. So it would be easy for them to triple that herd in a year's time. So we're talking about a very, very generous gift here. But how does he do this? How does he send them over to Esau? Let you there.
Every drove by themselves.
Okay, every drove by themselves. Now, I don't necessarily know what, I didn't look up what a drove was or anything of that nature. It's not a specific number. It's just however many so many men can handle at the time. And however many the pasture can handle at the time. So they would send them on separately. So let's just say, for example, maybe he separated the bulls and the cows and sent them. And he separated the donkeys and sent them. And maybe he split the sheep into 2 groups and 2 droves and sent them separately. And maybe the goats. So there'd be, at least 5 or 6 different droves here, maybe more. And so as he sends them by droves, what else does he do? Ken?
He gives a message for them to give to Esau.
Okay. All right. So in sending droves, is he sending them all together?
No.
He separates them, don't he? Separates space between them. Again, what is he thinking in doing that? Yes.
It's a cautionary approach.
Okay.
He's setting a space between them. I mean, if Esau was upset,
All right.
the other side of that is if Esau receives as well, he's going to see this and see the gift has come, and then what keep coming, hopefully improve that.
Right. Okay. So as Dusty stated, it's a precautionary thing so that when the animals come, if the servants are slaughtered or whatever, then the others will see that and they'll turn back, and then Jacob will know we're in for a fight. But if he does receive them, then as he said, things should only get better as the droves continue, because Esau will see that my brother is sending me a very nice gift. And so they continue on, and they take this great gift to Esau, deliver them by droves. And then he said, as Ken was getting to just a second ago, when in verse 17 of Genesis 32, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong, and where are you going, to whom do these animals in front of you belong? Then you shall say, these belong to your servant Jacob. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he is also behind us. And then he commanded the second and third, and so on, those that followed the drove, saying, after this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And in verse 20 he says, and you shall say, behold, your servant Jacob also is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with a present that goes before me, then afterward I will see his face, perhaps he will accept me. And so Jacob is really hoping for a good outcome in regard to this. So the present passed on before him while he himself spent that night in the camp. All right, so he's in the camp that night. And sometime during the night, what does he do?
He gets up and takes his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passes before the Jabbok River.
Okay, all right, so he's there on one side of the Jabbok, really on the southeastern side of the Jabbok, and he's going to ford the Jabbok and take his wives and his children across. And he took them and set them across the stream, and whatever he had left, he took across. And then he comes back over, and stays on that side of the Jabbok, hoping again to prevent Esau from harming the rest of his family. So at this point in time, the writer takes a break from all of this in connection with Esau and tells us what happened during the night and what happened to him. He wrestles, he does. He wrestles. The scriptures tell us, and I looked at several different translations, and they all seem to say that he wrestled with a man. But we know from Hosea chapter 12, we'll look at that in just a moment, and this passage and what follows this passage, that it wasn't just a man that he wrestled with. And so he wrestled with him until daybreak, and when neither one had prevailed, the man touched the socket of Jacob's thigh, so that the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. And then the man said, "Let me go, because day breaks." And what did Jacob say?
I won't let you go unless you bless us.
All right, you got to give me a blessing. Here we wrestled all night, and you have not overcome me. So, and you're wanting release. I'm not going to release you until you give me a blessing. And so, very interesting conversation follows. Verse 27. He said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with prevailed." You have striven with God and men and have prevailed. Let's turn over to Hosea 12 now. Hosea chapter 12. Okay. Hosea chapter 12. And in this particular passage, Hosea is prophesying really against Ephraim or Israel. And he begins in verse 1 by saying, "Ephraim feeds on the wind and pursues the east wind continually and multiplies lies and violence. Moreover, he makes a covenant with Assyria, and oil is carried to Egypt. The Lord also has a dispute with Judah and will punish Jacob according to his ways. He will repay him according to his deeds." And this is where he goes back to the time when Jacob and Esau were in the womb. Verse 3, "In the womb he took his brother by the heel, and in his maturity he contended with God. Yes, he wrestled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He found him at Bethel, and there he spoke with us." And so there Hosea is prophesying about Israel and how they became, and really just telling some history, it's more history than it is prophecy, but he is reminding Israel of how they came about and who they belong to. And that's God. And so now we go back to our text in Genesis chapter 32. And the reason I wanted to go to Hosea is that because Hosea makes it clear that Jacob is wrestling with an angel, the angel of God. And so in connection with that, the angel of God is able to bless him and change his name. And Israel is now going to be the name not only of Jacob, but of those that are his followers. And that's important for us to consider, because in just a moment we're going to have a reference to Israel that does not apply to Jacob. It applies to the nations. And that's going to show fulfillment of prophecy a little bit later on. Verse 29. "Then Jacob asked him and said, 'Please tell me your name.' But he said, 'Why is it that you ask my name?' And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. I have seen the face of God. Does this remind you of Hagar? God appearing to her when she was out there in the desert, willing to just lay out there and die because she'd been kicked out of Abraham's household. The angel of God appeared to her. Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore to this day the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh and the sinew of the hip. Now, first of all, obviously he's not talking about cannibalism, because he's not talking about human thigh. He's talking about food for the Israelites, and what they ate. And they did not eat of the sinew on the hip because of what occurred with Jacob and his hip. Now, this is no commandment from God. This is just a practice that showed forth respect for their leader, their father, Israel. And so that practice has been in effect with the Israelites because of this wrestling that Jacob went through with the man, or the angel of God. And it's interesting that Moses throws that in there. We would not otherwise have known that. We would have thought maybe that was just some tradition that began because of, maybe this story, but it actually was, but nonetheless it was recorded in the scripture to show that's why they did that. Not because it was just tradition, but because of respect for their father, their patriarch, Israel or Jacob. So very interesting addition there to that story. And by the way, when I said just a moment ago that the writer pauses to tell us about this wrestling, I didn't mean to insinuate that that's not chronological. It is. It happened just like that because the scriptures are clear that that's the case. A lot of times, as we have spoken, it's not always chronological the way the writer tells us that throughout the book, tells us certain things throughout the book of Genesis. This is indeed chronological, so we can take that for the way it's put in there. And so Jacob, in chapter 33 then, Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Jacob and the two maids. All right, so here again, we see favoritism shown. If we were thinking about this from a more logical, not an emotional tie, but a logical tie, how would you think that the children would have been separated with their mothers? What lineup do you think would have been? Logically speaking. This is what I'm thinking. This may not be logical. This is what I'm thinking.
Oldest to youngest. I would think oldest to youngest.
Oldest to youngest, okay. I'm thinking the one that had one child in the front, the two that had two children behind her, and the one that had the most children in the rear. We're trying to play the odds here as Jacob is playing the odds. One that has the least possibility of affecting the whole group, and that's Rachel and Joseph. But we know of a certain that Rachel and Joseph are not going to be put there first. They're going to be last. And so we see that obviously this is an emotional reaction, from Jacob. It is and of course it's an emotional situation, no doubt. but then it's favoritism as well. So he puts the two handmaids and their two children up front, and then Leah and her 6 children, and then Rachel and her 1 in the very back, because he loved her more. And he loved Joseph more. And so that was his strategy, because he could not bear to lose Rachel and Joseph, willing to sacrifice all of the others for her. And I'm not saying that, so I can't even imagine being in that position. I'm not saying that I would have done anything different, maybe, but that was his thinking in connection with that. But then here comes Esau, and Esau doesn't come with sword or knife. He comes with open arms. And all of this planning and stress and thinking the worst just flies out the window. And how relieved Jacob must have been, and his family. I mean, he's not only torn himself up, he's so can you imagine, Murphy?
Again, in verse 3, it is impressive. And he passed over before them, that's the one in verse 2. And can you see this gesture of respect and love? He has bowed themselves to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. That must have been impressive.
Yes, it must have. And something that you would not have normally seen. Maybe a son to his father, perhaps, or something of that nature. The 2 brethren, not normal. Even, maybe in connection with a ruler or a priest or something. But you don't even hear of Abraham doing that before Melchizedek.
Yes.
So Jacob had really humbled himself. He had really understood that he had done some things that he really should not have done. And here we have this reconciliation, which is just a wonderful scene where Esau and Jacob reconcile themselves. And it reminds me of Isaac and Ishmael as they reconciled for a brief period of time while they buried Abraham, their father. But more so in that here's the one that said the last time they saw one another, I'm going to kill you. And was very serious about that. And now they have come back together and reconciled. So very, very great to see that. Wonderful to see that. And so then Jacob parades the family before Esau and his men, and they bow down and do obeisance to him. And he says, these are my wives and my children. See how God has blessed me. And they went before them, and of course the handmaids first, and then Leah, and then Rachel and Joseph. And all of these flocks that God has blessed me with, he showed them to Esau. And so they had a very good reunion. And Esau wanted him to come and settle with him there in Edom. But Jacob said no, we're not going to do that. Actually, Jacob says, I'll see you later. I'm going to move on at my own pace, because here I've got young animals to worry about. I've got young children, and they can't travel like you and your men can. So we'll come on slowly, and we'll see you later. But so far as we can tell from what is said here, they didn't see one another later in connection with that trip. And so Esau then says, well, let me leave some men behind to help you with this. No need of it. Go on. You take the gift that I gave you. And Esau, of course, wanted to refuse that, but he said, no, you go on and take the gift that I gave you. And we will be on at another time. And so Esau takes on his journey, and then we find that instead of going over to Seir, and I wish I had that map before me, but if you have a map that shows the Jabbok River and it shows Peniel and Succoth, Succoth is the town that Jacob actually moves to, which is just across the Jabbok River from where he wrestled with the angel. So the Jabbok in that area kind of runs for a period of time. It runs due west, and then it takes a southern jog and then a bend, and then goes back to the north. And you can see where Peniel and Succoth are located very close to that bend in the river. And so he crosses over the river there, and they settle in Succoth, where he actually builds a house and some booths for his family, and that's actually, or for his flocks rather, and that's actually what Succoth means, booths. So they get to stay there for a while. Yes, sir.
You know, if we think about the history given in the Bible, and help us to know our God, you know, how he dealt with those folks, he still deals with us the same
Yes.
today. You know, and God made all of us in the beginning, and all of us got lost in the beginning. But because God loves us, he wants to save us. It is his will, you know. He's doing everything he can to get us to turn away from sin and come back to him and start living the way he says.
Right.
You know, but this is what it's given for, you know, to help us understand. You know, like we use nursery rhymes to teach children to obey us. You know, he used history to help us obey him, and help us to understand. See, whatever God has promised us, we'll get that. And nobody can keep us from getting that, including the devil himself. He doesn't have the power.
Right.
You know, God has all power in his hand.
Yes, sir.
And if we'll just trust in him, just learn how to live the way he said, you know. Our salvation is in the word of God. We got lost from disobedience. We're saved by obedience. And God promised Abraham he's going to make a great nation out of it. God did not lie.
Yes, sir. That's
He made
correct.
a great nation.
That's right.
You know, and he promised us that if we'll keep his word and obey his commandments, he's going to bring us up to heaven and give us eternal life.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Right.
Appreciate those comments. And we see that from the life of Abraham, we see it from the life of Isaac, from the life of Jacob, and we'll see it all throughout the Bible history. You're right. Those things that were written before were written for our learning. And so that's what we're seeing in this very context today. Appreciate you mentioning that. So Jacob arrives there in Succoth, and he, as verse 17 tells us, built for himself a house, made booths for his livestock. Therefore the place is named Succoth. And after that, he spent a period of time there, and obviously he would have needed more pasture land and that kind of thing. Not that area wouldn't have supplied that, because it was so close to the Jabbok River, but he moved over into Shechem then, which was in the land of, it was not necessarily in the land of Canaan. It was on that eastern side of the Jordan River. And so, in obedience to what God told him, he moved over into the land of Canaan, dwelt there in the land of the city of Shechem, and he came, when he came from Padan Aram, he camped before the city, verse 18 tells us. And he bought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Then he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel, God, the God of Israel. Now, other than his name being changed from Jacob to Israel, as we just read, when he was wrestling with the angel and he asked for a blessing, and that's what the blessing was. This is the first time that we see that word Israel used when it refers to not just Jacob himself, but to all his descendants as well. He erects this altar in Shechem. this piece of property that he bought from Hamor the Hivite, and he says, this altar is to God, the God of Israel. And so from this point forward, we see that Jehovah is the God of Israel. In the next chapter, we'll find that referenced again even more clearly in connection with his posterity. But we see today the first time that is mentioned. That's important. Consider that because here Israel is saying, God, you have blessed me. You have promised me, as you promised my forefathers, that we would be a great nation. And this nation will be the nation of Israel, and you will be the God of it. And so this is a very, very important milestone in connection with God's relationship and his people Israel, and Jacob recognizing that and going forward from here to serve him as he should. And I'm not saying that Jacob and his family remained perfect, because obviously we see in the next chapter that that's not the case. But nonetheless, God was their God. They were his people. Any comments or questions about what we talked about this morning? George?
I just want to mention that when Jacob wrestled with God, he said, I have seen God face to face, and he has preserved my life. We know elsewhere in the scriptures that no man has seen God and lived. So I'm a little confused about that, because we discussed it was the angel of God that he wrestled, but Jacob said that. They named that place Peniel, or however you pronounce it, which has E-L at the end for God. And he says, I've seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. I don't really understand that completely.
Okay. Ken?
I've always wondered that that was just at about daybreak, and he really didn't get that good a look at it. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just my way of resolving that question.
Right.
My other thing is, we never hear what happened to those idols and things that Rachel hid.
Yeah, sure.
I've always wanted to know, hey, what's the rest of that story? When Jacob found those, what did he say?
Right. Yeah. No, we don't know. It's not revealed to us. But in connection with what George said, I've always thought of that as being this angel of God. This is a representative of God. And here Jacob and this angel are struggling, and God has allowed him to be his representative, and Jacob has struggled with this representative, this messenger of God, and not that he's literally seeing Jehovah face to face, but nonetheless he's seen his representative, and he has, in a figure, been able to live as a result of that. Scott?
Well, as George mentioned, we know that the scripture says no man has seen God, so that kind of clears that part, so it can't be that. So I kind of see it as, we use the phrase, I look death in the eye. It's kind of the same thing. It's of course he didn't look God face to face, but he understood he was dealing with God. He understood, as you mentioned, it was a representative what was happening here. And so I think that's kind of what we have to go with on that.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
God said to Moses, no man can look upon God and live. But God can manifest himself unto us. He manifested himself to Moses as a burning bush.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham is a great whirlwind, but he can manifest himself to us. And Jesus Christ, our Lord, was in a human body. And that's the only reason why we could be with him.
Right.
And not be destroyed.
Okay. Good point. Anything else? Yes, Murphy?
Jeremy, on some of the comments, beginning on page 95, about Walter made, I like them. Jacob's wrestling with the angel parallel to the fervent prayer that Jacob was offering to God that he be spared from the hand of Esau. The angel who came to wrestle with him and Jacob's overcoming were physical demonstrations of what he was accomplishing through his prayer. This was God's message when he changed Jacob's name to Israel with the explanation, you have striven with God and have overcome. God was saying, Jacob, you have striven with me in prayer and I have heard you. You have overcome, you need not be afraid. But Jacob was too afraid at the moment to realize what God was saying. We see a lesson here that is taught often throughout the Word of God. Our physical enemies are not the ones whom we should fear. God is the one with whom we must contend, and he has in parentheses, strive. And if we succeed with God, then we will overcome the world, not by physical means, but as Jacob learned, by relying upon God. Beautiful.
Yeah. Very good.
And one more thing.
Yes, sir.
You know, God has witnesses. The angels of heaven are God's witnesses, you know, and they do appear to some of us in the earth, you know. And they still, we don't see them, but we have God's name watching over us, you know. We are very, very precious, you know. And he's not going to allow anything to happen to us, but you know, our faith is what makes us fearful, not having enough faith and trust in him, making him fearful. But the more we trust in God, the less we fear. You know, it's like when our little children see danger, they'll run back to us.
Mm-hmm.
We need to learn how to do that when we see danger.
Right.
Run back to
Perfect,
God.
perfect love casts out fear. Okay. Thank you so much for your comments and your attention this morning.